It must be the holiday season coming up because we're seeing a lot of new accessories coming out, especially for the Xbox Series X. A couple weeks back, I took a look at the new Instinct Pro controllers coming from Scuf, and this week, I got a look at the new Wolverine V2 Chroma from Razer. Now, this controller was just announced. Razer did send this early for me to check out and kind of have a hands-on with. This is an updated and more expensive version of the Wolverine V2 that was released earlier this year, adding a lot of functionalities that were missing on that controller. While this is more expensive than the original V2, it is still a cheaper Pro controller option than a lot of other ones out there, like Xbox's own Elite Series 2 or the very new, very expensive Scuf Instinct. What exactly makes this one special? Let's talk about it. First off, quick overview of what isn't really different about it versus the V2 if you haven't looked at that controller. It is the same body design, same kind of wraparound comfort grip. It is a wired controller, and of course, one of the big selling points of a lot of Razer's Pro controller options is its inclusion of mechano-tactile face buttons, meaning instead of the regular button press you'll see on most controllers, these little guys are clicky. Aside from the very satisfying click back that this gives, one of the major upsides is that it's a very easy to actuate button and allows for very rapid pressing when need be, and it is honestly my favorite aspect of a lot of Razer's Pro controllers. This is why the Raiju Ultimate was my go-to on the PS4, and it's why I am really tempted to make this my new main controller. It also has onboard audio controls if you're using a wired headset. It doesn't work if you're using a wireless headset to your system, but if you've got a 3.5mm jack plugged in to this controller, you can use this button in combination with the D-pad to increase or lower the master volume or change the game chat audio mix. So with all that in mind, what makes this different from the V2? Well, I'm going to actually break this down into two different categories. Functional things that I think have a direct impact on how you play games and how it changes your experience using the controller, and then other upgrades that do increase the value of the controller, but are maybe a little more on the aesthetic or just simplicity of use side. On the function side of things, the three big differences are the sticks, the D-pad, and the reprogrammable buttons. On the stick side of things, the base default sticks on this controller are the same as on the V2. However, unlike the regular V2, the Chroma gives the ability to swap out stick heads, and it includes two alternatives. This is basically the standard setup we're seeing in a lot of Pro controllers these days. You've got the standard ones, just the short, concave ones, and then as two additional options, you have a single domed option and a taller necked concave. The benefits of these being that the longer neck gives you more precise control, a larger range of motion, which is really nice for things like, say, aiming a sniper rifle, while the domed head is a little more comfortable if you're constantly pushing against it. It's good to use on the left stick for motion, or if you're doing very erratic, fast movements looking around on the right stick. Either way, that one makes sense. These are very easily swappable. It's just a magnetic setup, so you can just pull it off, pop it on, no issue. One pet peeve I do have about this, though, is that while it doesn't really bother me that the Chroma doesn't come with a carrying case, it's a nice bonus, but not something I need to have, I do wish it had just some kind of small thing that gave me a convenient way to store away the stick heads I'm not using. I am very bad when it comes to losing small parts, and so even if it just had a small little baggie or a tiny little container, some way to sort away the sticks I'm not actively using, I would have really appreciated it. It's not a make or break thing, but just something that always kind of bothers me a little bit. As for the D-pad, the feel is very similar in that both the V2 and the V2 Chroma have a clicky feedback, but the big difference here is shape. The original V2 just has a traditional looking D-pad, whereas the Chroma goes for a circular design that is not the exact same as what Xbox is doing with their faceted D-pads, but has that similar kind of concept, right, where you have the upraised four main directions, but then still a full circular design. Personally, I like this better. One of the main reasons why is because I find it to be much more useful if I'm going to be using it for a fighting game. The ability to do rolling inputs or hitting diagonals just feels a lot more precise with the circular design, whereas the traditional four-directional one still works fine, but is generally better for games where you just need to tap one direction and that's it, for instance, say in a lot of FPS games. Then we have what is probably the largest difference between this and the V2, which is the changes to reprogrammable buttons. The previous V2 had two of them located in the top right here, which we still have on the Chroma, and those ones are fine, they're solid, they're reachable without getting too much in the way when you still want to use the triggers or shoulders, but generally, it's a lot more common and popular to have additional buttons on the back, which the regular V2 did not have. The Chroma offers these two on the top and now these 4 buttons on the back. They're placed in a way that you're not really going to rest your fingers on them. You can, but I don't find that to be quite that comfortable if you're doing this kind of setup. Rather, I prefer to just have a regular comfortable grip and then I can reach over for whichever one I want to hit. I do find this works a little bit better for people that like using just their index fingers on the top for triggers. If you like doing the more claw style where you're doing all 4 up here, it feels a little more awkward to me. It's not quite as comfortable, but still works. All of these buttons can be remapped using Razer's controller configuration software, which is available on Windows 10 or can be used directly on your Xbox as well. Along with being able to act as a variety of different buttons, they do also offer a clutch feature where you can use them as a way to quickly change stick sensitivity. So for instance, let's say you're in a situation where you really want to have a less sensitive stick control, you can make it so that when holding down one of these buttons, the stick now reads at a lower sensitivity. Now, as for slightly more minor features, part of the namesake of this controller, and of course one of the big selling points of a lot of Razer products, is that the Chroma does of course now feature lights. The original V2 just had these green lines right here, whereas on the V2 Chroma, it is now a programmable light that comes with a lot of these standard settings you have on Razer products. You can set it to breathing, a solid color, cycling through different spectrums. You can choose what colors you want to do, just giving you that little bit of extra customization and personalization. Another major change is the cable. While this is still a wired controller that must be plugged in for regular use, the cable is now detachable as opposed to the hardwired one on the V2, which I definitely like a lot more. The big upsides to this are 1, it's easier to transport, so you can unplug it, wrap the cable up on its own, good to go. And 2, if something were to ever happen to the cable, hopefully not, but if something ever happened to it, you can use other USB-C cables and still get full use out of your controller, as opposed to just breaking the whole controller. As someone who owns cats that will absolutely eat and destroy any braided cables they will find, that is a very real fear of mine, and I appreciate having a controller that's not going to be bricked from it. There are some other very minor changes to the controller, mostly on an aesthetics basis. For instance, the shoulders and macro buttons up here are no longer glossy. A minor change, one that I do personally like. I don't really like gloss on my controllers. I much more prefer a matte finish. So you still have the gloss on the front-facing buttons, but the D-pad and all the shoulders up here now have that matte finish, which I think looks a lot better. So, does all of this come out to being a controller that is worth the $50 price increase? Yes. To be honest, I do wish it was just a little cheaper to be a little more aggressively competitive against some of the other controllers out there, in particular Xbox's own Elite Series 2. It's just having a first-party controller for $180 that includes a carrying case and is wireless. That's a lot to go up against. But I think the V2 Chroma does an excellent job of arguing as a strong alternative, especially at its still lower price point. One of the biggest things that I think potentially holds it back for a lot of people is that this is a dedicated wired controller, something that is honestly very common for a controller that is aimed exclusively at being a pro controller, but it is understandable that a lot of people out there like the option to use it in a wired configuration or wireless for the occasional convenience. While there are some benefits from other controllers that I think are worth looking at, like having wireless support, like coming with a carrying case, I really do think the V2 Chroma does a great job of marking off all the really important core functions of a pro controller: remappable buttons, swappable sticks, I like the D-pad, while also having some features unique to Razer that really gives it its own distinct identity. Specifically, again, mechano-tactile buttons that I absolutely love. Compared to the regular V2, if you're willing to spend the money, I honestly think the $50 is totally worth it. Extra buttons on the back are just way more accessible and better to use than these ones up top. Swappable stick heads are of course always a benefit, and the redesigned D-pad is just something I personally really prefer. It also lights up, which is cool, but at the end of the day, I'm focusing a lot more on the functional side of this. If no wireless is a deal breaker for you, then you're gonna have to accept needing to spend more money to get one of the competing other controllers out there. And I will say that as far as getting something in a full package, the official Elite Series 2 still feels like a little bit better of a deal to me because of the fact that it does have wireless support and a carrying case. But if you don't really care about having wireless support because you could just use a standard Xbox controller for the times you want that kind of just ease of access, this offers all the most important core functionalities like remappable buttons, short triggers, swappable stick heads, all that good stuff, while also offering those mechano-tactile buttons at what is still, relatively, one of the cheaper price points for pro controllers. I will say, for my own personal use, I'm at a bit of a crossroads right now. I really like the mechano-tactile buttons on this controller, and being a wired-only option doesn't really bother me personally. But there are aspects of the, again, very expensive Scuff Instinct Pro that I really like, in particular, having the clicky feedback option for triggers. If I could have that and the clicky face buttons on this, that's a dream controller right there. But until then, I'm gonna have to put this and that one through their paces, especially with another Halo Infinite demo coming up, and maybe I'll give a little more proper comparison of which of these I really like the most. If you guys are interested to see that video, make sure to let me know down below in the comments and subscribe so you don't miss out on it. Also like this video if you enjoyed it, and I will see you guys later.